Now, residents of the Denver temporary shelter say they've lost all their belongings as a result of the heavy rain. The structures were erected as a temporary housing solution for the victims of the Usindiso building fire in Marshalltown that claimed the lives of over 77 people in August of last year. Now, some of the displaced fire victims were moved to the area in November. Civil society groups have lambasted the conditions the victims live in. Joining me now is President of the General Workers Industries Union, Mametlwe Sebei. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. The victims of the Marshalltown fire continue to suffer even more losses. What exactly has happened here?
Compliments of the new season. Yes, what we see is a continuation of miserable conditions that never really stopped. They were there before the fire, with the accommodation in conditions of the degradation that we have argued was simply not compatible with human dignity. And of course, the fire added the misery. But beyond the fire itself, the conditions in which these communities had been accommodated in an informal settlement, far from their jobs, from schools, from areas where they were earning any living, without an adequate water supply, without an ablution facilities, and all of that. And I think what this flooding has done is that it has only highlighted but also aggravated those conditions, because what the flood does is that it graphically brings into focus the conditions in which these people have been accommodated, which we have said from the beginning is quite miserable, that people are left with what remained or what new, assets they've tried to accumulate since the fire itself totally lost, is just an indication of the kind of miserable conditions in which they were housed in the first place.
I know that there's also been complaints about the actual environment. A lot of the people who've been relocated feeling that they feel unsafe. Talk to us a little bit about that, and also expand a lot more on how this fire started. Pardon me, not the fire, the floods. What impact that has had on the victims of the Marshalltown fire?
Look, what has transpired is that, as I've said, they've been accommodated in shacks, and what you see there is that some of these shacks, I'm told, could only lock from outside, meaning basically you can only lock yourself inside the shack itself, but also the location of the shacks is under matter. People are also, using candles. And I think it was in generally a dark area where there is basically no electricity. And obviously all of these are conditions for general lack of safety. And that is in addition to problems of hunger, the fact that they have not been supported. And these are people that then are forced to eke out a living in conditions that are extremely not safe, without support. We have reported here during December holidays that one of the people there reported that she only has one bag of rice for Christmas. That is the kind of situation that we have. But even that was still a very fortunate situation. Many people have had to abandon their whole lives in the city and have went back to KZN and other areas, rural areas where they originally come from, simply because of an intolerable conditions in which they have been housed, but also the way in which the city officials, as well as all levels of government and the state, have treated these victims.
The city of Johannesburg has been given 90 days to comply to a court order which has given the municipality 3 months to improve the living conditions of the Marshalltown victims. What sort of approach and communication has taken place since that court order?
Nothing with us. If anything, remember we had massive demonstrations involving thousands of people in the inner city, where we demanded, one, justice for the victims of Marshalltown fire, which for us include monetary compensation to alleviate their conditions, alternative housing, and all lot of other things, as well as criminal accountability for those that are responsible for neglect, for neglect and conditions that actually caused that fire. But we've also pointed out that there's got to be a discussion about the broader crisis of housing in the city of Johannesburg. That is the conditions in over 220 buildings that are said to be hijacked, by which they mean that they are, of course, outside the control and the services of the city at the present moment. Many of the poor and disparate people forced to live in these buildings are facing extortions from the criminal and organized criminal syndicates that have hijacked these buildings. We said this issue need to be addressed. We said the issue in the informal settlements, which this fire actually highlight, need to be addressed. I mean, we are living, we are living through an unfolding climate catastrophe where we can expect that floods, heat waves, and number of other extreme weather conditions are going to be with us for some time.
Yeah.
And I think the city that has a plan has got to say what we do about not only the victims of Marshalltown fire, but hundreds of thousands across the city that are living in informal settlements. But also that is true of the people in the country. We wrote a memorandum following that demonstration. There's not been any response, and the city has simply refused to engage with us, as, of course, other levels of government. And I think that is a problem, and that's the reason that we need to mobilize, we need to go back to the streets.
Charles Cilliers, who represents the city, spoke to one of my colleagues here at Newzroom Afrika, saying that, they are prepared as a city to comply with the recent court judgment. But they have said that they can't do everything because it's impossible to do everything because it has limited resources at its disposal. Where does that leave the residents who are in desperate need of proper living conditions?
All what that confirms is the impotence of the city of Johannesburg, the bankruptcy of the political elite that governs the city, but I think also that governs the country as a whole in the face of the massive, chronic and deepening crisis of housing, not only in the inner city of Johannesburg, but across all the major centers, urban centers in the country. I think to say that there are no resources available is an insult to our intelligence. This country has one of the most advanced construction industry. If we really wanted to mobilize the capacity in this industry, we could build homes for everybody. We could build homes for about 3.7 million people that, are facing a housing backlog in this country. 13% of the population that is living in informal settlement, as well as all other infrastructures. And you just have to look. Whenever there is a mall that needs to be constructed, right, the efficiency, the capacity, just the sheer scale of the industrial capacity that is on display, it shows that it's not lack of technical, but also, the resources that we need to be able to overcome the crisis of the housing and the construction that must go into that, right? It is a question of the fact that these are in a private hands. And that is the reason some of us have said, if you take an approach that the housing crisis, the intolerable suffering of the people that live in a complete degradation and in informal settlement, in degraded and, of course, so-called hijacked buildings in the inner city of Johannesburg, if you take that this is really a social crisis that is incompatible with the idea of human dignity, what will you do? You will bring into public ownership the construction in this country. And there was a time, by the way, which we should remind South Africans, when the construction used to be located within municipalities and other public services, and government used to build homes. Today, all of this is privatized, is outsourced, and that is where corruption comes in, through tenders and all the things which lead to misappropriation and, of course, misdirection of billions and tens and hundreds of billions of rand that are meant for housing that end up with the tenderpreneurs that contribute absolutely nothing, that leave projects uncompleted. And I think this is a problem that we need to address. So we argue there are resources. We argue there is an urgent need for a mass public housing program to ensure that we accommodate and build decent homes for everybody in the inner city of Johannesburg, but across the country as well.
And how much confidence do you have into the inquiry into the Marshalltown fire?
Look, we participate there insofar as there is a need to bring as much perspectives of the victims and, of course, of the activists that have been working in the housing, space within the inner city of Johannesburg as possible. But we have absolutely no illusions. We have, a history of this kind of commissions. In the final analysis, their whole purpose is to cover up the fact that capitalism, its political elite, and of course their neoliberal policies are simply incapable of overcoming this crisis. The fact that the crisis that was identified as one of the major problems, in fact, behind the revolt of the black working class in a struggle against apartheid, the crisis of housing, that crisis not only has not been overcome, in fact, it has gotten worse. When the ANC took over, the backlog in 1995 was said to be 1.5 million housing units. Today, it stands at 3.7 million housing units. As I've already pointed out, 13% of the people in this country living in formal settlement. Not to mention that when you go to townships like Alexander, Denver, and many others across the country, Soweto, but also as far as Western Cape, KZN, across all the major informal settlement, generations of families, right, are congested in old apartheid social housing. And I think that is the reason there are so many conflicts within families. That is the reason we have an elevated levels of gender-based violence. And I think that is contributing to a complete breakdown of the fabric of society and the families because of the crisis whereby many generations of families have to be fighting over a limited number of houses. And I think for us, that is a crisis that is part of the system that I think is built on the neoliberal program of the ANC, but also of the DA and all the major political parties of capitalism. And we need an organized working class to overcome this crisis through a political organization that will also ensure that we take economic power through nationalization of the key sectors of the economy to bring the economic capacity and the industrial capacity in the public sector to build houses, but also to overcome all the challenges of poverty, unemployment, and all other challenges facing the working class.
Yeah, let me thank you so much for your time. Mametlwe Sebei, Giwisa President, Civil Society, in support of the Marshalltown victims who have since been displaced following the floods that affected their structures a few days ago.